Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Franz Kruger. I'm head of the Department of Journalism at Wits, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Taco Kuiper Award ceremony, which is taking place on Zoom given the circumstances. And in a normal year, we would be, can't remember at which stage of the proceedings in terms of a good lunch. And I'm hoping that everybody in their homes has got something to eat and something to drink. Unfortunately, the cigars will have to wait for another year, I think. What an extraordinary time we're in with the COVID crisis facing us as South Africans, as citizens of the world, and of course as journalists. We at Wits have had a series of webinars, and we plan to continue doing so, discussing the way in which the COVID crisis is affecting journalists. And really, we're finding a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. And one of the issues that has struck me about the situation is that really, as journalists, we're reporting from inside this crisis in a way that we haven't, we rarely do. We're really affected as much as anyone else. We take this opportunity also to remember what I think is the first journalist to have died of COVID in South Africa. I mean, there have been other deaths elsewhere from ENCA's Cape Town office. We're affected in exactly the same way as the people that we report on. And of course, that creates a very different relationship that we have with our audiences. But investigative journalism continues to be incredibly important. And I think even as we share the same sense of anxiety and worry about what's happening, as we worry about our livelihoods and about our families, we really need to remember the importance of the kind of critical distance that is central to journalism, and particularly to investigative journalism. From the start, our program at Wits Journalism has had a major interest in investigative reporting. We have grants, we have various programs that are active in the space. We offer courses in the field. And it remains an absolutely critical side of the journalistic enterprise, and will continue to do so, will continue to be so into the future. We've been very fortunate to have a long-running partnership with the Valley Trust in support of various aspects of this, particularly these awards, some of the grants that have supported some very important investigative journalism over the years, and of course the African Investigative Journalism Conference, which we hope to host again later in the year, which we will host again later in the year, though I think it will look much the same as this award ceremony today. It'll be largely or perhaps entirely virtual. So we're very grateful for that partnership. It's kept us going, and I think it has made a big contribution to sustaining the kind of critical, in-depth reporting that really shows journalism at its finest. I'd like to introduce Judge Tom Clutie, who's the chair of the Valley Trust and a former judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal, who's been a good partner as a person and as chair of the trust and as representing the trust for all this time. Judge Clutie will talk to us for a few minutes about the trust's involvement in this field and about the person, I think, whose name is attached to these awards. Judge Clutie.
Thank you very much, Franz, and welcome to everybody who's listening. I want to tell you a little bit about Taco to start with, and those who've heard it before, please don't mute your screens or turn me off because I've got some new material. Taco was only 2 years old when he was interned in a Japanese concentration camp Tijing in West Java, together with his mother. And he slept at his mother's feet. She fed him her rice ration as well, so that he wasn't hungry. And as a result of that, she went blind at a very young age. He was in that camp for 3 years, so he was 5 years old when the war ended. And he and his mother returned to Holland, because of course they were Dutch. They returned to the Netherlands. And then I'm going to fast forward a moment to Taco's school. He went to primary and secondary school in The Hague, but he became very difficult, to quote his brother, in his adolescent years. He attended 3 secondary schools in The Hague, starting with a very liberal one and ending up with a very strict one, and it didn't make the slightest difference. He wasn't interested. So they sent him to a Swiss boarding school, and interestingly, the fees there, it was terribly expensive. The fees there were paid by a friend of Taco's mother's, who was interned with her in the Japanese concentration camp. The Swiss school also was not to Taco's liking. I think it might have been mutual. And he got his last chance at a boarding school in the Netherlands. That didn't work either. He was very good at tennis and squash even those days, but even better with the ladies. He was always a man who the ladies found attractive. But what made him particularly attractive during this time of his life was that he owned a very heavy motorcycle, a Norton 500, which according to his brother made him even more attractive. So it soon became apparent that Taco just refused to study and couldn't care less. He had 2 jobs in quick succession in a merchant bank, Pearson, Heldring and Pearson, which I understand is the Dutch Coets. That didn't work out, or rather his liaison with the secretary of the chairman didn't work out, from the chairman's point of view, I think. And he then went to London and joined Hambros, and that didn't work out either, I can understand, for similar reasons. So he then left to seek his fortune in South Africa. And he found it in The Investor's Guide, which was a book that he compiled and printed. It became overnight a must-have for every amateur investor in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and every professional stockbroker as well. And it went through very, very many editions and was the source of his considerable wealth. He did have an interest in investigative journalism and in exposing crooks. He published some defamatory articles, and he was sued, and he had much fun appearing for himself in court. But it was his wish when he died that a rich prize be endowed. He didn't say in his name, but the trust have asked that it does bear his name, the Taco Kuiper Investigative Journalism Award. And it was a fortuitous meeting that I had with Professor Anton Harber in the Rand Club. And I'd mentioned this, and he said, oh, I've got the perfect place for you. Wits can do this. And they certainly have. And we're very proud of our relationship with Wits and very grateful. We could not have had a better partner. And so I must thank the Department of Journalism, Professor Kruger is here, and also in particular Anton, for putting this on the map, taking that ball and running with it. It's been a great partnership. Thank you very much. And we hope it will continue for many, many years to come. This, I think, is our 15th year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Klute, for that profile of Taco Kuiper and the additional material, which is really most interesting. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, who's Max de Prier. I first met Max in Windhoek. His official biography does not reflect this, which is a great disappointment to me, but there you are. When he was correspondent, I think, for Naspers at the time, and writing some really interesting stories about pre-independence Namibia. He's a former political correspondent of the Financial Mail, Sunday Times and Business Day also. And of course, famously, he is the founder editor of the independent anti-apartheid weekly Vrye Weekblad, which he founded in 1988. When it was forced to close down in February 1994, he joined the SABC and was executive producer there of the Truth Commission Special Report and Special Assignment. In 1999, he was dismissed for disrespecting SABC leadership. This continues to be a disappointment to the rest of us in journalism. He is the author of 14 books on South Africa's history and politics, and in 2019, he launched VryeWeekblad.com as a progressive Afrikaans voice outside the Media 24 monopoly. He's received numerous honorary doctorates and various awards, which I won't go through in any great detail. But we're very glad to have you here, Max, to talk to us a little bit about investigative journalism under these current circumstances. Over to you.
Thank you, Frans. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a privilege to say a few words at an occasion like this to fellow journalists. And it's a crisis point that we're talking at. And the crisis is not only a national health and economic crisis, but one where the media, especially newspapers, are struggling for their very survival. Several print titles will probably not survive a prolonged lockdown. And online publications watch as potential advertising goes to social media platforms and elsewhere. It is rather devastating that our resources as journalists are dwindling at a time that our society so desperately needs reliable, credible reporting and analysis. I think the only thing that we can really do as journalists in this battle for survival is to be better at what we're doing, to write better, to package it better, to convince society that it cannot function properly without an independent and vibrant media. And the last 2 decades have proved that a free and independent media was one of the strongest pillars of our democracy and our open society. I've been a journalist since the age of 23. And if you look at my face, you know that that is a long time ago. But it also means that I had the opportunity to observe many cycles of journalism in our country from up close. And the 70s and the 80s were particularly tough because of strict legislation, severe state repression, and states of emergency. But we had papers like the Daily Mail fighting the good fight to bring the truth to the public. And when the short-sighted owners closed it down in the middle of the turbulent 80s, a phenomenon called the alternative newspapers emerged, the Weekly Mail, New Nation, and South. And I was privileged in 1988 to join these ranks with Vrye Weekblad. So, Frans, allow me to break protocol for a few seconds and to pay a short tribute to Anton Harber, the co-founder of the Weekly Mail. He was a very young man when he did what he did with Owen Manoyam and a small band, but he can be credited alongside Zwelakhe Sisulu and others with keeping the spirit of defiant, truth-seeking reporting alive during the most difficult time. I think Anton's name belongs up there with the other heroes such as Percy Truboza, Rix Gibson, Alistair Sparks, Raymond Lowe, and Zwelakhe Sisulu. The alternative newspapers never had a mass circulation, but they relentlessly spoke the truth at a time that others were prepared to look away under pressure. It forced the extreme repression, moral corruption, and lawlessness of the apartheid regime onto the news agenda of the mainstream media. We made sure that nobody could with any credibility say they didn't know how evil apartheid really was. So when the post-1994 democratic project started derailing under Jacob Zuma and state capture, journalists again played a critical role with other branches of civil society to resist, to inform, and to expose. I think the role that investigative journalists, sometimes competing and sometimes cooperating in an exemplary way, had played in the battle against state capture is one of the proudest chapters of independent journalism worldwide in our time. It made me deeply proud to be a journalist and to be a South African. The investigative reporters of Amubungane and Daily Maverick, Mail and Guardian, News 24, others, even also local publications, all deserve medals and deserve our gratitude. As a quick note, it will be truly heartbreaking if the Mail and Guardian were to lose the battle for survival it is fighting right now. With our Bungane and Daily Maverick, we saw a new philanthropic financing model that initially made me rather nervous, but it is clearly inevitable and it works as long as openness and full disclosure of funders are maintained. But investigative journalism is much more than exposing political scandals and corruption. Investigative reporting on local government, on health, education, and the environment is as important, even if it sometimes feels less glamorous. I think after COVID-19, climate change will be the biggest threat to humanity. And we as journalists will have to rise to the occasion. So congratulations to all of you who have entered your work for this award. What you are doing is more than just a job. It's a service to humanity. It's a service to our struggling democracy. As members of civil society, we journalists are in the front line of the fight to keep our society open and informed. And only if we do that job well enough will our democracy and freedoms be able to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max, for those very kind words and for those very important words about investigative journalism. I am Anton Harber. I'm the convener of judges in this award, and it's my great pleasure now to deliver the remarks made by the judges on what they saw in the entries and to announce the winners. And before I proceed though, Max, let me say that it is wonderful to see you in the editor's seat, continuing a lifetime of work in this arena, and how important it is and how important that continuity is. So thank you very much. I also noticed that in our audience today is Margaret Wren, an old friend of this award, of our department, back in London, and we welcome her. And everyone else who's joined us this afternoon for this event. Well, for 14 years, this award has been recognizing and encouraging watchdog journalism, but never before have we done it under such extraordinary and challenging circumstances. Journalists have had to adapt to reporting under conditions of social distancing, working conditions which are fundamentally hostile to a reporter's need to get out into the field and to look their subjects in the eye. And our news media institutions, as Max has said, are under extraordinary financial pressure. The future of some titles, some very important titles, at stake. But we've had to learn and adapt. And I think it's going to be fascinating next year to see what kind of investigative journalism has taken place under such adverse conditions. Certainly our colleagues in the Global Investigative Journalism Network have highlighted some very interesting recent work done around the world, ranging from Rappler in the Philippines, who are using personal stories to highlight the agonizing confusion over virus testing. The New York Times using a team of 11 reporters to show how sick people are being denied tests. Peruvian reporters showing up faulty software exposing patients' data. And at home, we have seen how the first stories highlighting questionable elements in some of the government relief measures and scrutinizing security force conduct. We've seen ongoing investigations into scandals such as the VBS bank looting. So the signs are that the watchdogs of journalism are doing their work, keeping an eye on those responsible for managing the corona crisis, although under extremely tough conditions. Sorry, I've just hit a problem on my notes here. Okay, the virus also brought a new wave of disinformation, undermining attempts to manage it and its impact, and so threatening lives. I don't think ever before has it been as clear how disinformation can kill people. Sometimes this came from bored troublemakers sitting in their living rooms. Sometimes it was a geopolitical tool by governments trying to undermine their rivals. Sometimes it seemed to be presidents undermining their own governments, but it proliferated, and good journalism, the kind that selects, edits, verifies, contextualizes, and acts firmly and clearly in the public interest, has never been more important, especially, of course, good investigative watchdog journalism. I think one has to say that in South Africa, we have disaster regulations criminalizing the spreading of deliberate disinformation. Thankfully, these regulations were tightly and narrowly defined, unlike the emergency regulations we remember from the 1980s. While we may accept this as necessary in the crisis, we'll have to be vigilant to ensure that such restrictions on free speech are not perpetuated beyond the disaster. Another development that we really need to remark on was the social media targeting of journalists, and particularly women journalists, often vicious, frequently misogynistic. And we need to call for strong action to prevent this attempt to scare off journalists, at the same time as commending those journalists who bravely continue their work despite such threats and intimidation. Let me say the remarks out today are the considered collective responses of the judges, with a rare opportunity to survey the best work of the year. This presents a chance to make what we hope are useful observations in this field. So, this year we received 24 entries, a few more than last year. There is a shift, a very notable shift, in the outlets and media types among the entries, reflecting significant changes and diversification in our industry. For many years, investigative journalism and these awards were dominated by 3 or 4 mainstream newspapers. Now, the bulk of entries appeared first online, and many came from the new generation of specialist standalone investigative units, like Amambongani, Oxpeckers, Viewfinder, the OCCRP, or online-only outlets such as Daily Maverick, Groundup, MoneyWeb, and PoliticsWeb. This year we had one book, and 4 television entries. But again, sadly, none from radio, although we did have for the first time an audio entry in the form of a podcast. I'm very pleased to note that. A number of the entries were multimedia, combining the power of print, video, audio, and online for maximum reach and impact. And it's worth remembering that the first time we had an online entry was only 3 or 4 years ago. And now the bulk of our entries appeared online first. At least 7 entries this year came from non-profit organizations, which reflects the increasingly valuable and important role being played by these structures and the philanthropists who support them. This is significant. A lot of the most interesting work is not coming from what we would call the mainstream or traditional outlets, but from this new kind of specialist non-profit unit. Notable this year was the diversity of subject matters. As always, we had a number of exposés of corruption and state service delivery failure, but we also had entries that dealt with land, health, medical negligence, finance, the environment, local government, child abuse, police fraud, issues of justice in our courts, and importantly, white-collar crime. I'm very proud to declare that 3 of the entries received funding from our Taco Kuiper Fund for Investigative Reporting. We recently renamed the Henry Nomalo Fund. And of course, these were treated in exactly the same way as all entries. You will see that we go out of our way to recognize innovation, and you'll see some fine examples this year, whether it is in the choice of mediums such as podcasting, or forensic techniques such as using social media or data analysis. And as always, we must pay special tribute to 3 groups of people without whom the reporters we recognize today couldn't do their work. There are those who support them as audience, funders, or partners. Secondly, we must recognize the editors who back the reporters and encourage them to do original groundbreaking work. But perhaps most importantly, we need to remember the whistleblowers, those who risk their lives and their livelihoods to speak out against wrongdoing, often with insufficient reward or recognition. We give them a big shout out. But today, we're here to reward the journalists, and let's get down to that. The first judging panel this year consisted of myself and Thabo Leshilo, who's been a judge before, and we did the first round of selections that came up with a shortlist. We took the 25 entries down to the best 11 for the final judging panel to focus on them. The final judging panel, Thabo and myself, were joined by Lizeke Mda, Tom Clutie, who you've met this morning, Sarah Carter, representing an international eye and voice, and myself and Thabo, as I have said. Big thank you to all those judges for their time and commitment, and doing this for the first time under lockdown conditions. So let me get to the shortlist. That's what we're waiting for, and I'll run through the 11 on the shortlist in alphabetical order. The first is Daniel Knutzer of Viewfinder and Groundup for Killing the Fowls. This new independent investigative unit got its hands on a huge database of records from the Independent Police Investigative Unit and used sophisticated data analysis to show that the police watchdog was closing off scores of unfinished cases at the end of the year without proper investigation. It was a multimedia offering using video to humanize the story, and it had notable impact in that it has already led to policy changes on how this reporting would happen in future. Let me show you a short extract from Daniel's video.
Our police are getting away with murder, torture and rape. The unit set up to investigate crimes committed by police members is understaffed, under-resourced and undermined.
Thank you, Danielle. Second is Dion Wiggett, freelancer and for News 24, who carried his story, called, of course, My Only Story. It is a podcast series in which Wiggett took us along as he went back decades to investigate his own abuser. This was this year's sleeper hit. Podcasting is in its infancy in this country, but Wiggett's highly personalized story, relentlessly investigated and movingly told, had major impact, leading to the arrest of the alleged perpetrator. It was refreshing to see such a powerful audio entry, and it's now giving rise to a book and a second series. Let's play a short audio extract.
My first big breakthrough is in March 2019. I go down to Cape Town. I meet some old friends and journalists. I am told some gossip and some rumors and hearsay. I can't repeat any of it here because, hey, rumors and hearsay, or, as they call it in detective shows, clues. By now, I know the names and faces of everyone in Jimmy's extended circle. Know them well enough that when someone says, I know this guy, Mike, I immediately go, Mike DeWitt, which isn't his real name. So my friend who knows Mike tells me a bit about what Mike told him. Now, Mike is quite a bit younger than me, and he was once a central character in Jimmy's life.
Thank you very much, Dion. You get a sense there of just how personal and moving an account it was. The third on our shortlist is Hazel Friedman of the SABC and Sipho Kings of the Mail and Guardian, who did a series of stories on land issues. Friedman, of SABC's Special Assignment Program, submitted a number of television entries dealing with the elite capture of land reform. And one of these was also done in print with Sipho King of the Mail and Guardian. It was a fresh take on an important issue and has led to an official investigation and the charging of at least one official.
So many other emerging farmers who are caught up in the same sort of scenario. We've got cases here in the Western Cape, we've got cases in the Northern Cape, we've got cases in the Eastern Cape. People who are being victimized as against being protected by government officials. So many other emerging farmers who are caught up in the same sort of scenario. We've got cases here in the Western Cape, we've got cases in the Northern Cape, we've got cases in the Eastern Cape. People who are being victimized as against being protected by government officials.
Sorry about that repetition, but that was an extract from Hazel's video. The next shortlisted entry comes from Khadija Sharif and Mark Anderson of the OCCRP, Organized Crime and Corruption Project, for the State Capture Papers. The OCCRP is known for its important work in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It was refreshing to see them tackling a South African story. Sharif and Anderson got hold of a copy of a computer server from Trillion, a company at the center of state capture. And they gave the first detailed account of how the notorious Gupta brothers had laundered their money through a web of shell companies. They also showed how Trillion used insider information on the firing of the finance minister to profit at the expense of their own clients. It was thorough and it was important work. Next is Mika Reddy and Stefans Brummer of Amambungani for the EFF Rent Racket. This entry was a compendium of stories in which these two reporters exposed how the EFF used influence over tenders to fund themselves and their party, exposing the hypocrisy of the EFF's claim to be fighting corruption. It was a complicated story, thoroughly investigated, and it's had important impact on the way the EFF is viewed by the media and by the public. Carte Blanche is our next shortlisted entry with some work by Nikki Troll. JRA Falling Down. This piece was the result of work over more than a year by a journalist determined to track down the story, behind the sorry state of Johannesburg's roads. She tracked down inside sources, got an audio recording of a senior official talking about his kickbacks, confronted him dramatically on camera, and uncovered deep corruption in the Joburg Road Agency. It was a thorough piece of work and very good to see a focus on local government.
A number of bridges are seemingly not being attended to. 707 bridges are in a poor to very poor state. Another 143 are considered to be fair, while only 52, that's just under 6% of the bridges in the JRA network, are in good to very good condition.
Number 7 on our shortlist is Paulie van Wyk of Daily Maverick, or Scorpio, the investigative unit in Daily Maverick, for her coverage of the Economic Freedom Forum and the VBS saga. One can only call this Paulie's magnum opus. It threw open how the EFF benefited from the VBS bank looting, despite all their attempts to deny it and cover it up. This involved classic investigation, like getting documents and inside sources, but it was imaginative, forensic social media analysis that pulled the story together and broke new ground. By triangulating credit card statements with social media data, Paulie found the missing link from the bank and its payments to the EFF leadership. It really must be noted too that Paulie stood firm in the face of an onslaught of serious abuse and threats from EFF supporters. Well done, Paulie. Number 8 is Peter Louis Myberg with his book Gangster State with Penguin Books. Every now and then, there comes along a piece of work that is so impactful and convincing that it comes to define the way the public sees someone. That is the case with Myberg's deeply researched book and its subject, the senior politician, Ace Magashule. It was interesting that Myberg left his perch at the country's biggest news outlet to spend months piecing together a comprehensive expose of the background of one of the country's most powerful people. Magashule threatened to sue, but of course hasn't, over a year later, and that he is still in his job, says more about this country's politics than it does about the strength and importance of this book. Number 9 is Ray Joseph and Anton van Zyl with Ground Up for Gaming the Lottery. This extensive investigation started as an international cooperative project on lotteries at our African Investigative Journalism Conference. These two combine data-driven investigation with on-the-ground reporting, raising critical questions about an important national institution. It's good to see such work coming from the cooperation of a local newspaper editor and non-profit organization Ground Up. The lottery has responded with threats and bullying, but it's notable that the responsible ministers ordered an investigation and the pursuit of criminal charges. And so the saga is ongoing. Well done, Ray and Anton. Second last on our list comes from Ryk van Niekerk of MoneyWeb for the Pickvest property scandal. This is a formidable body of unique work that unravels a most complicated story, what van Niekerk describes as the country's most significant investment tragedy, involving the looting of some 4.6 billion of pensioners' money. Van Niekerk did deep forensic work to uncover the looting that took place. It is bewildering the story has failed to get more attention from the authorities. Another example of the subjects resorting to threats and bullying to try and scare off the journalist. Good work, Ray. Our last on the shortlist comes from Thandukolo Jika and Sabella Sikiti of the Mail and Guardian for how Floyd Shivambu used VBS money to buy a Range Rover. Excuse me. It was interesting that we had 2 shortlisted entries dealing with the EFF and its use of VBS money, highlighting the role journalists have played in exposing one of the most horrific acts of looting at the expense of poor people. This one was the first to home in on the now notorious Range Rover that has come to symbolize the hypocrisy of many of those who purport to speak for the poor in this country. G. Kansika did important and thorough work. So there you have it. What an extraordinary range and quality of work we have on this shortlist. I think you have to agree with me. All of these had the potential to win an award such as this, and all of them deserve recognition and accolades. Testament to the core strength of South African journalism, the dedication, commitment that produces this work under tough conditions. The judges had a hard time separating them, but this is what we had to do. What we did was we took this down to a short list of 4, then down to just 2, before we thrashed out who among those 2 was the winner and the runner-up. And I'm going to take you along with us on this journey. When we went down to 4, we were left with these, again in alphabetical order. Daniel Knutzer of Viewfinder Ground Up for his Killing the Fowls. Dion Wiggett for his My Only Story podcast, published by News 24. Paulie van Wyk of Daily Maverick for her EFF and the VBS saga. And last on the short list, Peter Louis Myburg with his book, Gangster State, with Penguin Books. That's the short list of 4. We then came down to 2. First of the 2, Paulie van Wyk of Daily Maverick. And the second of the 2, Peter Louis Myburg for Gangster State. So one of these gets the first prize of 300,000, the other gets 100,000, Which is it? I'm going to announce the runner-up first, but let me say this. As I announce it, we are going to unmute everyone's mic. So please feel free to express your appreciation for the runner-up and the winner. Well, after long online social distance deliberation, the judges decided the runner-up for this year's Taco Kuiper Award for Investigative Journalism, who takes home 100,000 Rand, is Paulie van Wyk of Daily Maverick for EFF and the VBS saga. Sorry, I made a small mistake there. The winner, of course, takes home 200,000 Rand and the runner-up 100,000. There we have Paulie. I'm not sure why that happened, but that clearly leaves the winner of this year's Taco Kuiper Award for Investigative Journalism as Peter Louis Myburgh for his book, Gangster State. We might be spread out all over the place, but let's give a big congratulations to Peter Louis and Paulie for their work. Thank you very much. We have 70 people in the room and we can't hear them all. I'm not sure what happened to the unmuting, but I suspect they're all clapping our two winners. Congratulations to them both. I'm going to ask first Peter Louis and then Paulie if they would like to say just a few words. We haven't done this before, but I think that considering how far apart we are, we would like to hear from them. Peter, would you like to say a few words? And Tsepo, is he unmuted?
Yes, he is. If you could just unmute himself on the other side and then start his video.
Peter, are you celebrating already, or can you unmute yourself?
Oh, okay.
And turn your camera on. Oh dear. Looks like he's coming. Are you there, Peter Louis? Paulie, I wonder if you're there and you would like to say a few words?
Yeah, I can fill in. I firstly must say thank you to Branko Brickage, our editor. What you said about the importance of editors at the start cannot be underplayed. I wouldn't have been able to write this and go through with this if it weren't for an editor who believed in me and who supported me and to strengthen my hands. The fact that I'm in the top two, the runner-up of Taco Kuiper, is a testimony to the strength of the Daily Maverick team and the strength of the Scorpio team, our investigative team. I'm very proud of my colleague and friend, Peter Louis. We've done well to hold authority to account. It's never been easy. And I'm also proud to have been runner-up in such an important and big selection of people. But let's give him a word.
There we are. Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. That wraps up our awards. I have a few thank yous to give to wrap this up. First and foremost, the Valley Trust for their very valuable partnership. We've worked with them for many years, and their contribution has been enormous. I must thank Wits University for its support, and particularly my colleagues in Wits Journalism for the support they give the work we do in investigative journalism and for these awards. There is a team that does the work behind the scenes. Tsepo Chabalala, Shireen Rubenstein, and Pierre Miller, thank you for the hard work you all do to make these awards work. The judges for giving their time and so much effort and consideration. And finally, a thank you to Kathy Dovey from KD Events for helping us with the presentation. That draws to the end our award ceremony for 2019-2020. A big congratulations in the end to the winners. I normally have a toast and share a whiskey and a cigar with the winners. I think the best I can do is hope that soon we'll be able to get together and share that celebration. Well done to you all. Well done to all the entries and the finalists. It's been a great pleasure doing this. Keep up the good work, and let's hope we can get together for next year. Thank you very much.